and welcome to the African Utility Week studio. My name is Amy Ryan, Deputy Editor at Metering and Smart Energy International, and today I have with me Jonathan Berman, who is the Managing Director at Fieldstone. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you for speaking with us today.
Sure.
Jonathan, your background is more on the financial side within the energy sector.
That's right. I mean, I've been involved in financing energy for about 30 years. Initially at big banks and now for the last 11 years with Fieldstone, and that's what we do. We raise financing for energy and some other infrastructure projects.
Okay. Do you want to maybe tell us about some of your current projects or activities?
Sure. So we're working more and more in renewables, as you would expect, although we still do traditional infrastructure, ranging from solar PV projects in South Africa, in Nigeria, hydro projects in Uganda, in Zambia. Still some old-fashioned coal as well. Botswana, we're working on a coal mining project right now. We have been working on coal to power in Mozambique as well. So it's a pretty wide range.
Yeah, okay. And then what are some of the major financial challenges experienced by your local municipalities, your utilities, and maybe some of the local and national government? What are some of the challenges associated with the power infrastructure investment?
Sure. Well, look, there's a lot of money around for energy these days, particularly renewable. You know, there's a wave of private sector money wanting to do solar in particular, and there's also a lot of money from development banks globally who want to support clean energy in Africa. So that's the good side. The difficult side is the power industry in most countries is dominated by state utilities. And even though they're allowing private investment, they want to be the party that buys the power under long-term contracts. And many of those state utilities, whether at the national level or, as you said, the municipal level, are finding their own financial resources are very stretched. So you have this paradox that the demand for power is there, particularly in fast-growing economies in the rest of Africa, you know, particularly somewhere like Kenya or Senegal. The demand is huge. The ability of the consumer to pay is also there, but the utility that has to buy the power may have a weak financial resource. So that's probably the key challenge we're facing at the moment.
Okay. And then how do you think mergers and acquisitions globally have impacted or influenced the energy market?
I'd say in the power space, surprisingly little. You know, in the African market, because it's dominated by state entities, because private companies are new, we've seen a fairly small amount of M&A activity in Africa itself. Globally, where you're seeing the influence is you're seeing, it's more the industrial shift rather than a particular M&A towards renewables. Some of that's happened through M&A. So, I mean, you've seen solar companies being acquired by bigger energy companies. But I won't say M&A has had a huge impact on Africa yet.
Okay. Do you think that maybe some of the global or maybe some of the international mergers and acquisitions may have ripple effects in Africa, or not so much?
No, again, I think as the size of the private investment in the African market grows, then we'll see more of a linkage. But because at the moment the African market is largely new greenfield investment, it hasn't been as directly affected by M&A. You know, the most important thing has been that technology shift towards renewables, which is not just producing greener power, but it means we're seeing cheaper power, we're seeing decentralized power, and smaller projects. You know, I mean, if you look back 10 or 15 years, to do a new private power plant in Africa, you had to be at least 100, maybe a few hundred megawatts. Now you can make projects viable at 10, 20, 30 megawatts of solar PV. So there is a room for smaller companies, and actually it may mean that less need for the big players to invest.
Okay. And then what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs looking to finance the new projects or endeavors?
Well, again, the overwhelming theme is look at the technological changes. You know, going to do a big coal plant isn't probably a great space for a young entrepreneur. So first of all, I'd say a young entrepreneur, get involved in renewables as the growth sector. And that needn't just be project development. It could be engineering suppliers, it could be people who go and do resource mapping, It could be a lot of different aspects. So get involved in that space. Secondly, understand that it's a fast-changing space. So, when I started doing project finance, nearly 30 years ago, you do projects that you knew were going to be around for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
Today, if you invest in energy projects, it's getting more like the IT industry as a trend. So it may be that you invest in something now that after 5 or 10 years is redundant.
Yeah.
So the risks are a lot greater. On the other hand, it's a lot more interesting and fast moving. So for an entrepreneur, it's actually a great space to be in.
Okay. Where do you think perhaps is where innovation is needed? Where perhaps along the energy value chain, do you think innovation and finance is most needed?
Yeah. I'd say two things. So first of all, technical innovation in energy storage.
Okay.
So the big drawback in renewable energy is it doesn't run around the clock. The sun goes down at night, the wind doesn't blow. Even in Cape Town, the wind doesn't blow around the clock. And so that's the big thing that's been holding back renewables, is the need for storage, so that at night when the sun goes down, you've got energy, or when the wind doesn't blow. Investment in that technology is largely happening in the larger markets like the US. Okay? There's no reason why there couldn't be some of that here in Africa, particularly in larger markets like South Africa. But I think most of that technology will come from other countries to Africa. So the opportunity is probably to deploy it. That's from a technology side. From a commercial side, as that technology comes, then the opportunities will be to completely decentralize power. The old grid-based power model, where everything has to go through a big utility, is bound to change. So there'll be room for a lot of smaller companies to set up different business models. It might be the household, wanting a solar panel on their roof. It might be a mid-sized company, or a school, or a hospital, or it might be people building very large power plants off the grid. We all talk about the grid in power. Maybe we won't need the grid in future. And if you're a country that doesn't have a grid at all, maybe it'll take a long time to build a grid.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about going off the grid globally. So I think especially in the US and Europe.
Yeah.
And perhaps, and there's been a lot of talk around maybe perhaps more tailored to the African market, where the energy infrastructure is a bit lacking, where the microgrid will kind of maybe replace that model.
Yeah, I have a feeling that'll be the case, as you say, where there is no existing grid or very limited existing grid. It'll actually make more sense in some cases to go off the grid or micro local grids, because frankly the utility isn't there, can't keep up. So what we hope there is that regulators are sensible enough, that they recognize that, it's a consumer market that you have to take care of, but if you over-regulate, you'll stop innovation. So if I used an analogy from finance, the case of M-Pesa, the mobile money scheme in Kenya. M-Pesa was a great success partly because the financial services regulators didn't crawl all over it and say you're like a big retail bank. So they let the telcos, in that case it was Safaricom, innovate, and a new market was created. And I think if we have a similar light touch approach by energy regulators, then we'll see a greater innovation in off-grid energy.
Okay. And then finally, what are your top, say, maybe 2 predictions for the power and utility sector over the next 1 to 2 years?
Okay, firstly, back to the point we made at the beginning, the balance sheets of state utilities will remain a huge problem. Not in every country, but in most. And that's going to make it a little bit harder to finance things. And secondly, that the shift towards renewables is going to continue, and the pace of that shift is going to get faster than we think.
Okay. Is there anything else around financing in the energy sector that you'd like to add? Is there anything that's maybe not being said enough around financing?
I think the key thing is how long are these assets going to be around? We all grew up with an idea that power assets are things that last for decades. And that's whether it's coal or nuclear or large hydro. And yes, the assets will last for decades. In the same way as you know, if you had a 40-year-old car with the right maintenance, it's still going to run. The question is whether you should be running that 40-year-old car or leasing space in a new electric one or using Uber. And I think that's the shift we all have to think about. We don't know how fast it's going to be. None of us, you know, I mean, I've been giving lots of predictions, but we don't know how fast. But I think that trend is there, and that's going to shake up the energy industry and the financing side of it as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. That's it for this afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Amy Ryan coming to you from the African Utility Week studio. Thank you.